The hammer struck the anvil with such force that sparks scattered across the dim blacksmith shop like dying fireflies, and Marlowe Dawson barely flinched as one landed on her leather apron, already scarred from countless burns that told the story of her new life whether she wanted them to or not. Trinity, Colorado, in the year 1876, was not a place where women worked metal, shaped horseshoes, or commanded respect in trades meant for calloused masculine hands. Yet here she stood, 22 years old, auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun that fought against the humid heat of the forge, her father's tools gripped in hands that were learning to be strong even when her heart felt like shattered iron. Thomas Dawson had died 3 months ago, his heart giving out one morning while he was shoeing old man Henderson's mare. He collapsed right there in the dirt, the hammer still warm in his palm, and Marlowe had found him when she brought his lunch at noon. The memory still cut deeper than any blade she had attempted to forge. The shop was all she had left. Their small house sat adjacent to it, connected by a covered walkway her father had built the year her mother passed. The property was paid for, but the debts her father owed to suppliers in Denver were not. She had discovered them in his ledgers, carefully hidden beneath records of completed work. He had been trying to expand, to build a better life for her, and instead left her with a choice between selling everything or learning a trade no respectable woman in Trinity had ever attempted. Marlowe chose the forge. The townspeople had opinions, of course. Mrs. Henderson whispered to anyone who would listen about the impropriety. The banker, Mr. Carlyle, suggested she marry quickly and let a husband take over the business. Even Pastor Williams had pulled her aside after church, concern creasing his weathered face as he asked if she had truly considered the difficulty of what she was attempting. She had smiled politely, thanked them for their concern, and returned to her anvil. Learning the craft from her father's old journals and her own stubborn determination was brutal work. Her arms ached constantly. Blisters formed and popped and formed again until calluses replaced them. She ruined 3 horseshoes for everyone she managed to complete adequately. But she was learning, and more importantly, she was surviving. The shop door opened, letting in a slice of late afternoon sunlight that made her squint. Marlowe straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of soot she did not bother to check for in the small mirror by the water bucket. "We are closed," she called out, her voice rough from breathing forge smoke all day. "Sign on the door says open until 5, came the reply, a deep voice that carried neither judgment nor mockery, just simple fact. "My watch says 4:30. Marlowe set down her hammer and turned fully to face her visitor. The man who stood in her doorway was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed a trim and eyes the color of strong coffee. He held his hat in his hands, a gesture of respect she had learned not to expect from most men who entered her shop. Dust covered his boots and the lower part of his dark trousers, suggesting he had ridden some distance. "What do you need?" she asked, moving closer but keeping the anvil between them like a shield she had learned to maintain. "Nathan Noble," he said by way of introduction, not extending his hand since hers were black with forge work. "I run the Double N Ranch about 8 miles north of town. My farrier quit last week, headed to the California coast with dreams of gold still glittering in his fool head. I have 20 horses that need shoeing, and I was told Thomas Dawson was the best smithy in 3 counties. Marlowe felt her chest tighten. "Thomas Dawson was my father. He passed in June." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a softening around the eyes that seemed genuine. "I am sorry for your loss, truly. I met him once about 2 years back. He shod my personal mount and refused payment when the work was done ahead of schedule, said a man's word and timeline should matter in business. That sounds like him, Marlowe said quietly, then lifted her chin. I run the shop now. Nathan's gaze moved past her to the forge, to the half-finished horseshoe still glowing orange on the anvil, to the tools arranged with careful precision on the workbench. His eyes traveled back to her face, taking in the soot smudges, the determined set of her jaw, the leather apron that was clearly her father's, cinched tight at her waist with extra strapping to fit her smaller frame. "Can you shoe 20 horses?" he asked, and there was no challenge in it, just an honest question deserving an honest answer. Marlowe could have lied, could have said yes and figured it out as she went, desperate for the work and the money it would bring. But her father had taught her that reputation was built on truth, and she would honor that even if it cost her. "I can shoe them adequately, but not quickly. I am still learning the craft, and I will not do poor work just to get payment faster. If you need speed, you should take your horses to Colton Springs. They have 2 experienced farriers there." "Colton Springs is a full day's ride each direction," Nathan said. "And I am not interested in speed if it means my horses suffer for it. I am interested in honest work from an honest person, which seems to be what you are offering. I am offering slow work that will get the job done right, even if it takes me twice as long as it would have taken my father, and I will charge accordingly." Nathan considered this, turning his hat over in his hands. Marlowe noticed his fingers, long and capable, with old scars that spoke of ranch work and the kind of labor that left permanent marks. "How about a different arrangement?" he said finally. "I know my way around a forge. My father made sure all his sons learned basic smithing before we were old enough to shave, said a rancher should know how to repair his own tools and shoe his own horses in a pinch. I am no master, but I am competent. What if I work alongside you? You handle the detail work, the actual crafting, and I help with the heavy lifting, the repetitive hammering, whatever you need. We split the work between 2 people. It gets done in a reasonable time. My horses get proper care, and you get the payment you need." Marlowe stared at him, trying to find the trap in the offer. Men in Trinity did not help women, not without expecting something in return. They offered to take over, to manage, to handle things because surely a woman could not. But Nathan stood there, waiting patiently for her response, his expression open and honest in a way that made her want to trust him even as her instincts screamed caution. "Why would you do that?" she asked bluntly. "You could just take your horses elsewhere or wait until I build up more skill." "Because I recognize stubbornness when I see it, and I respect the hell out of it," Nathan said simply. "You could have sold this place, could have taken the easier path. Instead you are here, burning your hands and breathing smoke, learning one of the hardest trades there is because it is yours and you refuse to let it go. That takes spine. Also, practically speaking, my horses need shoeing before the autumn drives start, and this arrangement benefits us both. I do not need charity. Good, because I am not offering any. I am offering partnership on a specific job for mutual benefit. You keep full payment since it is your shop and your materials. I get my horses shod properly and in reasonable time. Seems fair to me." Marlowe turned back to her forge, staring into the glowing coals as she considered. She needed the work desperately. The payment for 20 horses would cover her father's debts to the Denver suppliers and leave enough to restock materials for the coming months. But letting someone into her space, into the shop that had become her sanctuary and proving ground, felt like admitting she could not do it alone. Except she could not do it alone, not really. Not yet. And there was no shame in accepting help that was freely offered without strings attached, was there. She faced him again. "All right. But I make the final decisions on the work. If I say a shoe needs to be reforged, we reforge it. This is my shop and my reputation on the line." Nathan nodded immediately. "Agreed. Your shop, your rules. When do you want to start?" "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Bring 2 horses to start. We will see how the work goes before I commit to all 20. "Fair enough." He settled his hat back on his head, then paused at the door. "Thank you, Miss Dawson. I know that trust does not come easy in your position. I will do my best to prove worthy of it." After he left, Marlowe stood alone in her shop, listening to the tick of cooling metal and wondering what she had just agreed to. The forge glowed like a heartbeat, steady and warm, and she returned to her work with hands that trembled slightly from something that was not quite fear, and not quite hope, but somewhere complicated in between. Nathan arrived the next morning at 6 o'clock precisely, leading 2 horses and carrying a cloth bundle that turned out to contain fresh bread, butter, and jam. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, insisted," he explained as he set it on the workbench, careful to keep it away from the forge dust. "She said anyone working a forge at dawn needs a proper breakfast, and she would have my hide if I showed up empty-handed." Marlowe eyed the food with barely concealed hunger. She had eaten only coffee and yesterday's biscuits, saving her money for materials rather than groceries. "Thank you," she managed, pride wrestling with gratitude. That was kind of her. "She is good people," Nathan agreed, then moved to examine the horses he had brought. "These are Juniper and Sage, 2 of my gentler mares, good temperaments, patient with shoeing. Figured we would start easy." They worked in careful tandem, Nathan holding the first mare steady while Marlowe examined her hooves, checking for cracks, measuring for the proper shoe size. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, instructions from years of watching him work before she ever thought she would need to learn the craft herself. She explained what she was doing as she went, partly for her own benefit to organize her thoughts, partly to give Nathan the information he needed to help effectively. "Front hooves tend to wear more than back," she said, running her thumb along the edge of Juniper's hoof. "See how this one is starting to crack on the outer edge? We need to trim that carefully before we fit the shoe, otherwise the crack will travel upward and potentially lame her." Nathan listened intently, asking questions that showed he did know the basics, but was respectful of her expertise. When they moved to the forge itself, he proved his earlier claim about competence. His hammer strikes were strong and steady as he helped draw out the iron, shaping it while Marlowe directed the angle and curve needed for proper fit. The work went faster with 2 of them, but more than that, it went easier. Nathan seemed to sense when she needed space to concentrate and when she needed an extra set of hands. He fetched tools before she asked, kept the forge at the right temperature, and never once tried to take over or suggest she was doing something wrong. When she made a mistake on one shoe, heating it too much so that it lost its shape, he simply waited while she reforged it without comment or impatience. By noon, both horses were shod properly, and Marlowe felt a surge of pride looking at the finished work. The shoes were not as perfectly symmetrical as her father's had been, but they were solid, well-fitted, and would serve the horses well. "Good work," Nathan said, running his hand down Juniper's leg to check the shoe one final time. "These will hold up fine. Want a break for lunch, then bring 2 more this afternoon." They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Nathan would arrive at dawn with food from Mrs. Chen, always something nourishing, bread, eggs, sometimes cold chicken or beef. They would work until the midday heat became unbearable, break for an hour in the shade of the large cottonwood behind the shop, then return to the forge until early evening. Slowly, methodically, they worked through his string of horses. Marlowe found herself looking forward to the mornings, to the sound of hoofbeats announcing Nathan's arrival, to the easy conversation that developed between them as they worked. He told her about his ranch, about the challenges of running it after his father passed 2 years ago, about his younger sister who had married a doctor and moved to St. Louis, writing letters full of stories about city life that seemed as foreign as the moon. She told him about growing up in the shop, about her mother who had died when Marlowe was 16, about the strange grief of losing her father in the same place where so many of her happiest memories lived. They talked about Trinity, about the characters who populated the town, about the upcoming harvest festival that the whole county attended every September. "Will you go?" Nathan asked one afternoon as they waited for iron to heat. He was leaning against the workbench, sleeves rolled up, soot marking his forearms. Somewhere over the past week, she had stopped seeing him as an outsider in her space and started seeing him as a natural part of it. "To the festival? I had not thought about it." In truth, social gatherings had lost their appeal after her father died. The pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, they exhausted her more than a full day at the forge. "You should consider it," Nathan said. "Mrs. Chen makes these apple tarts that are legendary. She enters them every year and wins every year, and then everyone fights over who gets to buy them at the bake auction. Also, there is dancing, music, a chance to be something other than a blacksmith for one evening." "I am not sure I remember how to be anything else anymore," Marlowe admitted, surprised by her own honesty. Nathan's expression softened. "I understand that feeling. After my father died, the ranch consumed everything. Every waking moment was about keeping it running, proving I could handle what he left me. Took me a solid year before I let myself do anything that was not work. My sister finally wrote me a letter that basically called me an idiot for forgetting that living means more than surviving." Was she right? She was right. He checked the iron, judged it ready, and pulled it from the forge. As he positioned it on the anvil, he added, "Come to the festival, Miss Dawson, even if just for an hour. You deserve some joy in between all the smoke and sparks." The offer, gentle and without pressure, settled somewhere in her chest and stayed there warm and persistent even after they returned to work. By the end of the second week, all 20 horses were shod beautifully. Marlowe ran her hands over the final set, checking her work with a critical eye that was slowly becoming more confident. The shoes were good, solid, work she could be proud of. More than that, she had learned enormously from working alongside Nathan. His presence had pushed her to work faster without sacrificing quality, and his knowledge of horses had filled gaps in her understanding that her father's journals could not address. "Well," Nathan said, straightening from where he had been examining the last mare's hooves, "that is the full string." "Beautiful work, Miss Dawson. My horses are lucky to have your skill." "Our work," Marlowe corrected. "I could not have finished this quickly without your help. Still your shop, your craft." He pulled an envelope from his vest pocket, thick with bills. "Payment as agreed. And I hope you will consider me a regular customer. My horses will need reshoeing come spring, and whatever other metalwork the ranch requires." Marlowe took the envelope, feeling the weight of it, knowing it represented security and breathing room and the ability to pay her father's debts. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the work and for helping me. You did not have to do that. I know." Nathan smiled, and something in that smile made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with forge work or business arrangements. "I wanted to." Which brings me to a question I have been working up courage to ask for about 3 days now. "What question?" "The harvest festival is Saturday. Would you allow me to escort you, not as a business arrangement or out of pity or anything like that? Just as two people who might enjoy spending an evening together?" Marlowe's first instinct was to say no, to retreat into the safety of her shop and her solitude. But she looked at Nathan, really looked at him, at the honesty in his dark eyes and the hope in his expression, and she thought about his words from days ago. She deserved joy. She deserved an evening that was about living and not just surviving. "Yes," she said, and watched his face transform with the kind of smile that made her glad she had taken the risk. "I would like that." The Harvest Festival transformed Trinity's main square into something magical. Lanterns hung from every available post and tree branch, casting warm golden light across tables laden with food, baked goods, preserves, and crafts. A small stage had been erected at one end where a band of local musicians played lively tunes that had couples spinning across the dance floor, created by laying down smooth boards over the dirt street. Children ran between the adults, playing tag and sneaking sweets when parents were distracted. The air smelled of apple cider, roasting meat, and the last warm breezes of summer giving way to autumn's gentle chill. Marlowe felt strange in a dress, the blue cotton one she saved for church, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pinned back severely. Her hands were clean but still bore the marks of her trade, calluses and small scars that no amount of scrubbing would erase. She had almost changed her mind 3 times while getting ready, but then she heard the wagon pull up outside, and Nathan was knocking on her door, and it was too late for cowardice. "You look beautiful," Nathan said when she opened the door, and he said it like he meant it, like he was seeing all of her and not just the dress or the clean face but the woman underneath who worked metal and refused to quit. "You clean up well yourself," she replied, taking in his pressed shirt and vest, the way he had clearly made an effort that matched her own. They walked through the festival together, Nathan's hand resting lightly on her back in a way that felt protective without being possessive. People stared, of course. Mrs. Henderson whispered to her circle of friends, their eyes following Marlowe with varying degrees of disapproval and curiosity. But there were kind faces, too. Old Mr. Peterson, whose horse she had shod last week, tipped his hat with a genuine smile. Young Sarah Mitchell, who helped her mother run the general store, gave her an encouraging wave. They found Mrs. Chen's booth, where the legendary apple tarts were displayed like precious jewels. Nathan bought 2 without hesitation, handing one to Marlowe with the reverence the pastry apparently deserved. The first bite was a revelation, buttery crust giving way to perfectly spiced apples that tasted like autumn distilled into edible form. "Oh," Marlowe said around the bite, then laughed at her own incoherence. "This is incredible." "Mrs. Chen is a treasure," Nathan agreed. "She has been with my family since I was 10 years old. Came from San Francisco after her husband died, needed work, and my mother hired her within 5 minutes of meeting her. Best decision my parents ever made. She keeps the ranch house running and keeps me from forgetting to eat when I get too focused on work." They wandered through the festival, sampling foods, admiring the quilts and preserves entered in various competitions, watching children play games organized by the church ladies. Nathan introduced her to some of his ranch hands who had come to town for the festivities, men who treated her with the same respect they showed their boss, which she recognized as a reflection of how Nathan had spoken about her. As the evening deepened, and the band shifted to slower songs, Nathan turned to her with a slightly nervous expression that she found endearing on a man who had never seemed uncertain about anything. "I am not much of a dancer," he admitted, "but I would very much like to dance with you if you are willing to risk your feet." Marlowe had not danced in years, not since before her mother died, but she found herself wanting to try. "I will risk it if you will." The dance floor was crowded with couples, but Nathan found them a spot and took her hand with a gentleness that made her breath catch. His other hand settled at her waist, proper and respectful, and then they were moving to the music. He had lied about not being much of a dancer, or perhaps he was simply good enough that his skill made her feel graceful by extension. They turned slowly under the lantern light, surrounded by other couples, but somehow alone in their own bubble of awareness. "Thank you for coming tonight," Nathan said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I know it probably was not easy, putting yourself out here with everyone watching and judging." "It is less difficult than I thought it would be," Marlowe admitted. "Having the right company helps." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a deepening of the warmth that had been growing between them over the 2 weeks of working together. "Marlowe," he said, using her first name for the first time, making it sound like something valuable. "I want to be honest about my intentions. I did not offer to help with the shoeing just for business reasons. I mean, that was part of it. My horses genuinely needed the work. But after 5 minutes of talking to you that first day, I knew I wanted to know you better. These past 2 weeks have been some of the best I have had in years. Working alongside you, talking with you, learning who you are beyond the brave front you show the world. I would very much like to continue spending time with you, if that is something you might want to." Marlowe's heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the vulnerability of caring about someone again, from the risk of loss she had experienced too many times already. But a larger part of her, the part that had chosen to keep the shop and learn the forge and fight for what was hers, that part wanted to be equally brave about this. "I would like that too," she said. "I was not looking for this, for someone to see me as anything other than the strange woman who took over her father's shop. But you did see me, see all of it, and you stayed. That means more than I know how to say." Nathan's smile was brilliant, unguarded in a way that showed her how carefully he usually controlled his expressions. "Then we will figure this out together. No rush, no expectations beyond spending time together and seeing where it leads. Does that sound all right?" "That sounds exactly right." They danced 2 more songs before taking a break to get cups of cold cider. Marlowe was laughing at a story Nathan was telling about one of his horses who had developed a taste for Mrs. Chen's laundry and kept stealing sheets off the line when a sharp voice cut through her enjoyment. "Marlowe Dawson, I need to speak with you." She turned to find Mrs. Henderson bearing down on them, her expression pinched with disapproval, her husband trailing behind looking apologetic and resigned. Marlowe felt Nathan tense beside her, but she touched his arm gently, a silent message that she could handle this. "Mrs. Henderson," she said evenly, "are you enjoying the festival? I would enjoy it more if I did not have to watch decent people being led astray," the older woman said sharply. "It is bad enough that you have turned yourself into a spectacle, working that forge like a common laborer, but now you are parading around with Mr. Noble as if you have any business courting a respectable rancher. You should be ashamed of yourself." Marlowe felt her face flush, anger and embarrassment warring in her chest. Before she could formulate a response that would not make things worse, Nathan stepped forward slightly, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel she had never heard before. "Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, how Miss Dawson chooses to earn her living and who she spends her time with is none of your concern. She is one of the most skilled blacksmiths in the county. She has built a business through pure determination and talent, and I consider it an honor that she agreed to spend this evening with me. If you have a problem with any of that, I suggest you examine why a woman's success and happiness bothers you so much." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Her husband took her arm gently. "Come on, Martha," he said quietly. "Let these young people enjoy their evening." After they left, Marlowe let out a long breath. You did not have to do that. She will just talk more now, make things harder. Let her talk, Nathan said firmly. The only opinions that matter are yours and mine, and I think we both know where we stand. Anyone who cannot see how remarkable you are does not deserve your worry. The fierce protectiveness in his voice, the absolute certainty with which he defended her, made something crack open in Marlowe's chest. All her life she had fought her battles alone, stood strong because there was no other choice. Having someone choose to stand with her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, was a gift she had not known she desperately needed. Dance with me again, she said impulsively. Please. I do not want to let small-minded people ruin this evening. Nathan's expression softened, and he led her back to the dance floor without another word. They danced until the band took their final break, until the lanterns began to burn low, until Marlowe's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. When Nathan finally drove her home in his wagon, the night sky was scattered with stars that seemed close enough to touch. He walked her to her door, proper and gentlemanlike, but his eyes held a question that made her pulse race. Marlowe made a decision then, standing on her porch with this man who had somehow become essential in just a few weeks. She rose up on her toes and kissed him gently, briefly, a question of her own. Nathan's hand came up to cup her face, careful and reverent, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I will call on you tomorrow, he said quietly, if that is all right. That is more than all right. She watched him drive away, standing on her porch until the wagon disappeared into the darkness, then went inside with her heart full of something that felt dangerously close to hope. Nathan did call on her the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Their courtship developed alongside her growing skill at the forge, the two parts of her life weaving together in ways that felt natural and right. He would stop by in the afternoons after finishing his ranch work, sometimes bringing projects that needed metalwork, sometimes just bringing his presence and conversation while she worked on pieces for other customers. The town adjusted to seeing Nathan's horse tied outside her shop. Some people, like Mrs. Henderson, clung to their disapproval, but most of Trinity seemed to accept the relationship with varying degrees of support. Mr. Peterson started recommending her shop to travelers passing through. Sarah Mitchell made a point of greeting her warmly whenever Marlowe came into the general store. Even Pastor Williams admitted that perhaps there was nothing in Scripture that said a woman could not work a forge if that was where God had led her. Business picked up as word spread about her skill. She shod horses for 3 other ranches, repaired wagon axles, forged custom hinges for the new church annex, and created a set of decorative iron gates for the mayor's house that became a talking point for the entire town. Her confidence grew with each completed project, her hands learning to shape metal with increasing precision and artistry. Nathan was there for much of it, helping when she needed an extra set of hands, offering suggestions from his own experience, but always respecting that the forge was her domain. He never tried to take over or diminish her accomplishments, and that respect was more attractive than any physical feature could have been. 3 months into their courtship, on a crisp November afternoon, Nathan arrived at the shop with a serious expression that made Marlowe's stomach flip nervously. "Is something wrong?" she asked immediately, setting down the rake she had been working on. "No, nothing wrong. But I have something I need to ask you, and I wanted to do it here in your space, because this is such an essential part of who you are." Nathan took her hands, not seeming to care about the soot that marked them. "Marlowe, these past months with you have been extraordinary. You have challenged me, inspired me, made me laugh, and made me believe in partnerships where two people make each other stronger without diminishing either one. I know we have not been courting long by traditional standards, but I know my heart, and I know I want to build a life with you." He released one of her hands to pull a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the forge light and scattered it like captured stars. "I am not asking you to give up your shop or change who you are. I am asking if you would marry me and let us figure out how to blend our lives together. Your forge and my ranch, your independence and my support, building something neither of us could create alone. Will you marry me, Marlowe?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked at this man who understood her in ways she had never thought possible, who saw her strength and loved her for it rather than being threatened by it. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, more certainly. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close for a kiss that tasted like joy and promise, and a future she could not wait to begin. When they broke apart, both of them laughing with the giddy relief of a risk taken and rewarded, Marlowe felt her father's presence like a blessing. He would have liked Nathan, would have approved of a man who saw his daughter as an equal partner rather than something to possess or protect. They married in Trinity's small church on a cold December morning, with snow dusting the ground and frost painting the windows in delicate patterns. Marlowe wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and carried a simple bouquet of winter greenery and preserved flowers that Mrs. Chen had somehow made beautiful. Nathan stood at the altar in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle, and when Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like coming home. The reception was held at the church hall, with half the town attending despite the cold. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with the food, and even Mrs. Henderson managed a stiff congratulations, though her expression suggested she still had reservations about the entire arrangement. Marlowe found she did not care. She was too happy, too surrounded by people who genuinely wished them well, too focused on her new husband's hand in hers to worry about the opinions of those who could not understand. They spent their wedding night at the small house beside the shop, the one Marlowe had grown up in, because she had been honest about not wanting to leave it behind completely. Nathan had listened and proposed a solution that showed how well he understood her needs. They would split their time between the house in Trinity and the ranch, allowing her to maintain the shop while also becoming part of the ranch's operations. It would be complicated, require careful planning and compromise, but they both believed it could work. Lying in Nathan's arms that first night as his wife, Marlowe traced the scars on his hands that matched the ones on hers, marks of labor and dedication that told the story of who they were. "Are you happy?" Nathan asked quietly, his lips against her hair. "I am happier than I knew how to be anymore," she admitted. "After my father died, I thought maybe grief and survival were all I had left. You showed me that was not true, that I could have this too." "We both get to have this," he corrected gently. "A partnership where neither of us has to sacrifice who we are. I love you, Marlowe. Every stubborn, brilliant, strong part of you. I love you too. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for helping me when I needed it, and for believing I could do this even when I doubted myself." They fell asleep tangled together, the forge cold and dark in the shop next door, but ready to be lit again come morning because Marlowe's life as a blacksmith did not end with marriage. If anything, it was just beginning to expand in ways she never imagined. The rhythm they established over the following months was intricate but functional. Marlowe would spend 3 days a week in Trinity, running the shop, taking commissions, building her reputation further. Nathan would often join her for at least one of those days, helping with larger projects and maintaining his presence in town for ranch business. The other 4 days they spent at the Double N Ranch, where Marlowe discovered she enjoyed ranch life more than she expected. She set up a small forge in one of the outbuildings, allowing her to handle basic repairs and projects without traveling back to town. She learned to ride better, to help with the horses, to know the ranch hands by name and skill. Mrs. Chen became a beloved presence in her life, the older woman treating Marlowe with a warmth that filled some of the mother-shaped hole in her heart. They would cook together in the ranch house kitchen, Mrs. Chen sharing recipes and stories from her life in San Francisco, Marlowe sharing memories of her parents and her slow journey toward finding herself again after loss. "You are good for him," Mrs. Chen told her one evening as they prepared dinner. Nathan was out checking on a pregnant mare and the house was quiet around them. Nathan, he carried too much alone after his father died, tried to be everything for everyone, forgot to live for himself. You reminded him how to be happy, how to be partner instead of just provider. "He did the same for me," Marlowe said, chopping vegetables with the same precise care she brought to metalwork. "I was so focused on proving I could survive alone that I forgot there was honor in accepting help, in building something with someone else. That is good marriage, Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "Not losing yourself but finding bigger self together. You two have that, rare and precious." As winter gave way to spring, Marlowe discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, her monthly courses stopping, a persistent tiredness that the forge work alone could not explain, a tenderness in her breasts that made wearing her leather apron uncomfortable. She waited until she was certain, confirming with the doctor in Colton Springs during a trip for supplies, before telling Nathan. She chose to tell him in the shop, which felt appropriate given that was where their relationship had truly begun. He had come to help her with a large order of hinges for a new hotel being built in Colton Springs, and they were working side by side at the anvil when she simply said it. "I am pregnant. The baby should come in late October, early November." Nathan's hammer stopped mid-swing. He set it down carefully, then turned to her with an expression that cycled through shock, joy, wonder, and concern in rapid succession. "Pregnant, you are certain?" "I saw the doctor last week. He confirmed it." Nathan pulled her into his arms, heedless of the soot and heat and sweat that marked them both. "That is wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. How are you feeling? Are you all right? Should you still be working the forge?" Marlowe laughed against his chest. "I am pregnant, not fragile. The doctor said I can continue my normal activities as long as I feel capable. I will have to adjust as I get further along, obviously, but for now I am fine." "We are going to have a baby," Nathan said, like he was trying to make the words feel real. "You and me, a whole new person." "That is terrifying and amazing in equal measure." "I know," Marlowe agreed, pulling back to look at his face. "I am scared. I am excited. I am worried about how to manage the shop as I get bigger and after the baby comes. I am already imagining teaching them to work metal someday, if they want to learn. My emotions are apparently going to be unreliable for the foreseeable future." "We will figure it out together," Nathan said firmly, "just like we have figured out everything else. Whatever you need, however we have to adjust, we will make it work." They did make it work, though not without challenges. As Marlowe's pregnancy progressed, she had to modify how she worked at the forge. Heavy lifting became Nathan's responsibility entirely. She focused on detail work, on projects that required precision rather than brute strength. Some of her regular customers were uncomfortable with a visibly pregnant woman working metal, but most adapted, and new customers continued to seek her out based on reputation alone. Nathan became almost comically protective as her due date approached, worrying about every trip to town, every hour she spent at the forge. Marlowe found it endearing and irritating in equal measure, loving him for his concern even as she insisted she knew her own limits. Their son was born on a cold November night, arriving 3 weeks early during a snowstorm that trapped them at the ranch house with only Mrs. Chen for assistance. The labor was long and difficult, hours of pain that left Marlowe exhausted and frightened. But Mrs. Chen proved to have experience with birthing babies, her calm competence guiding them through until their son finally entered the world, small and red and screaming with impressive lung capacity. "He has your stubbornness already," Nathan said through tears as he held his son for the first time, the tiny bundle cradled against his chest like something infinitely precious. Refusing to wait for convenient timing, making his own schedule. They named him Thomas, after Marlowe's father, with the middle name of James after Nathan's father. Little Thomas Noble was a serious baby, watching the world with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. Marlowe fell in love instantly, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness and tender joy that came with motherhood. The next few months were an exhausted blur of feedings and diaper changes, and very little sleep. Marlowe had to step back from the shop almost entirely for the first 2 months, something that chafed against her nature, but was necessary. Nathan took over as much ranch work as possible close to the house, wanting to be near his wife and son, helping with night feedings and walking a crying Thomas when Marlowe desperately needed rest. "I feel like I have lost myself," Marlowe admitted one particularly difficult night when Thomas refused to settle and she was too tired to see straight. "I love him so much it terrifies me, but I also miss the forge, miss feeling competent at something. Is that terrible? Am I a horrible mother for wanting more than just this?" "You are a wonderful mother," Nathan said firmly, taking Thomas from her arms and settling the baby against his shoulder. "And you are still a blacksmith, still all the things you were before. Right now Thomas needs you in ways that have to come first, but that will not be forever. We will find the balance. I promise you that. You do not have to lose yourself to be a good mother." Slowly, as Thomas grew and settled into more predictable patterns, Marlowe began returning to the forge. At first just an hour here and there while Nathan watched the baby, then longer stretches as Thomas became content to nap in a cradle Nathan built and placed in the shop's corner, far from the forge but close enough for Marlowe to check on him constantly. Mrs. Chen would often come to town on shop days, watching Thomas at the house while Marlowe worked, refusing any payment beyond the joy of caring for the baby. It was not the same as before. There was less time, more interruptions, a constant underlying awareness of her son's needs that pulled at her attention. But gradually, she found a new rhythm, a new way of being both blacksmith and mother, neither role diminishing the other, but instead creating something more complicated and more rich than she had been before. Thomas grew into a curious toddler who loved the shop almost as much as his mother did. By the time he was 2, he would sit on a stool near the forge, carefully positioned out of danger, and watch Marlowe work with solemn attention. She would narrate what she was doing, just as her father once had for her, planting seeds of knowledge that might someday grow into skill if Thomas chose that path. "He has your patience," Nathan observed one afternoon, watching his son track Marlowe's hammer movements with complete focus. "And your ability to find beauty in metal and fire." "He has your kindness," Marlowe countered, thinking of how gentle Thomas was with animals, how he always wanted to help Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, how he shared his toys with other children without prompting. "And your steady heart." Life settled into a pattern that felt sustainable and good. The shop thrived under Marlowe's continued leadership, her reputation now spreading beyond Trinity to neighboring towns and counties. She hired an apprentice when Thomas was 3, a young man named Charlie who was eager to learn and respectful of having a woman teacher. With Charlie handling basic work, Marlowe could focus on the more complex projects that challenged and excited her. The ranch prospered too, Nathan's careful management and fair treatment of his workers, creating a successful operation that provided stability for their family. They added onto the ranch house, creating a dedicated space for Marlowe's metalwork so she could always have a forge close by, respecting her need to keep that part of herself active and growing. When Thomas was 4, Marlowe realized she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, her body knowing what to expect, her mind less anxious about balancing motherhood and work now that she had proved to herself it could be done. Their daughter arrived on a warm June evening, the birth quick and straightforward compared to Thomas's dramatic entrance. They named her Margaret, after Nathan's mother, with Rose as a middle name after Marlowe's mother. Maggie, as she quickly became known, was completely different from her serious older brother. She was all smiles and laughter from the start, a social baby who loved being passed around at church gatherings and charmed everyone she met. "She is going to be trouble, Mrs. Chen predicted with deep affection, holding a giggling 6-month-old Maggie who had just managed to pull the older woman's carefully pinned hair completely loose. Beautiful trouble, but trouble. Thomas adored his little sister, treating her with a gentleness that made Marlowe's heart swell. He would bring her toys, sing to her in his small, serious voice, and later, when she was old enough to toddle around, he would patiently include her in his games around the ranch. The years flowed past, marked by the rhythms of work and family, of seasons changing and children growing. Thomas did develop a love for metalwork, apprenticing properly with his mother when he turned 12, his patience and steady hands making him a natural at the forge. Maggie proved to have her father's gift with horses, spending more time in the stables than anywhere else, developing a reputation as someone who could gentle even the most difficult mounts. Marlowe watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and poignant awareness of time's passage. Thomas was so much like her father, serious and dedicated and finding joy in creating useful, beautiful things. Maggie had Nathan's easy warmth and her grandmother Chen's fierce loyalty. Both of them were respectful and kind, raised by parents who believed children should be taught to think for themselves while understanding their responsibilities to others. Trinity changed around them over the years. The town grew as new families moved in, attracted by the railroad that finally reached them when Thomas was 10. New businesses opened, old ones closed, and the Wild West that Marlowe had known in her youth gradually gave way to something more settled and civilized. The Harvest Festival remained a constant, growing larger each year, and Marlowe never missed it, always remembering that first dance with Nathan under the lanterns when everything felt new and terrifying and possible. When Thomas was 16 and Maggie 12, Marlowe's shop faced its biggest challenge. A fire started in the building next door, in the old abandoned warehouse that had sat empty for years. Despite the town's bucket brigades, the fire spread, and Marlowe watched helplessly as flames consumed the shop her father had built, the forge where she had learned to be strong, the space where she and Nathan had first discovered each other. They saved what they could. Tools pulled from the burning building by brave volunteers, the anvil that Thomas and Nathan managed to drag to safety, the sign that had hung above the door. But the structure itself was lost, reduced to charred beams and ash by morning. Marlowe stood in the ruins the next day, Nathan's arm around her shoulders, and felt grief wash over her. Not just for the building, but for her father who had built it, for her younger self who had fought so hard to keep it, for all the memories now literally turned to ash. "We can rebuild," Nathan said quietly. "We have the land, we have the skills, we have the resources. It will not be the same, but it can be good again." "I know," Marlowe managed, "but right now I need to just mourn what was lost. Is that all right? Take all the time you need. I am right here." The decision to rebuild came naturally after a few days of grief. Marlowe designed the new shop herself, incorporating everything she had learned over 20 years of working the forge: larger windows for better light, improved ventilation for the smoke, a dedicated space for Charlie, who had become a master blacksmith in his own right and her true partner in the business, a small area where customers could wait comfortably. And on the wall, in a place of honor, she hung the old sign that had somehow survived the fire: Dawson Blacksmith Quality Metalwork. The whole town turned out to help with the construction. Nathan's ranch hands provided labor. Mrs. Chen organized food for the workers. Even Mrs. Henderson, now elderly and somewhat mellowed by time, donated money toward materials. Thomas worked alongside his mother and the builders, his skill with metalwork translating to skill with construction. Maggie kept everyone's spirits up, bringing water and jokes and her irrepressible energy. The new shop opened 6 months after the fire, and it was beautiful. Modern while honoring the past, efficient while maintaining the heart of what the space had always been. Marlowe lit the forge for the first time surrounded by her family, her business partner, her friends, and she felt her father's presence like a blessing on the new beginning. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and inevitable sorrow. Mrs. Chen died peacefully in her sleep when Marlowe was 45, leaving a hole in the family that never quite filled. They held a beautiful funeral, honoring her Chinese heritage alongside her adopted community, and Marlowe spoke about how the older woman had been a mother when she desperately needed one. Thomas married at 23, wedding a sweet schoolteacher named Emma who loved his serious nature and gentle hands. They gave Marlowe and Nathan 3 grandchildren in quick succession, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter and the chaos of small children. Maggie traveled for several years, working on different ranches across Colorado and Wyoming, learning everything she could about horse breeding and training. She eventually returned to Trinity at 26, partnered with another woman rancher named Kate, and the two of them started their own operation breeding quality horses that became sought after across the region. Marlowe and Nathan grew older together, their hair silvering, their bodies showing the wear of decades of physical labor, but their love deepening with every year. They still split time between the ranch and the town, though Marlowe gradually turned more of the blacksmith shop's operations over to Thomas and Charlie. She still worked the forge regularly, finding peace in the familiar rhythm of hammer and anvil, but she no longer felt the driving need to prove herself that had consumed her youth. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Nathan took her back to the spot where they had first danced at the Harvest Festival. The festival was in full swing around them, but he pulled her away from the crowd to the quieter edge where lanterns cast gentle light. "Dance with me," he said, just as he had all those years ago. Marlowe stepped into his arms with the ease of 3 decades of practice, their bodies knowing exactly how to fit together. They swayed slowly to the distant music, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for helping me without trying to take over, for building a life with me instead of asking me to fit into yours, for 30 years of partnership and love and being exactly who you are." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for saying yes. For taking a chance on a rancher who showed up needing his horses shod and left with his heart completely given away. For teaching me what it means to truly share a life with someone. For being the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known." They danced until the song ended, then stood together watching the festival, their children and grandchildren scattered through the crowd. The town they had helped shape over decades spread out around them. Marlowe thought about her younger self, grief-stricken and stubborn, standing alone in a blacksmith shop and choosing to fight rather than surrender. She could not have imagined this future then, could not have pictured the love and family and rich full life that was waiting. But she had been brave enough to keep going, to accept help, to open her heart, and that had made all the difference. They lived many more good years, watching their grandchildren grow, celebrating as Thomas took over the shop completely and transformed it into one of the most respected metalworking businesses in Colorado. They celebrated as Maggie and Kate's ranch became legendary for quality horses. They sat on the porch of the ranch house in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, content in the life they had built together. Nathan died peacefully at 73, his heart simply stopping one night as he slept beside Marlowe. She woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, and she held him and wept for the loss of her partner, her love, the man who had seen her and chosen her and walked beside her for 45 years. The funeral was enormous, testament to how many lives Nathan had touched. His ranch hands, his children and grandchildren, people from across the county who had known his kindness and fairness. Marlowe stood strong through it all, supported by her family, sharing stories of the man who had helped a grieving young blacksmith all those years ago and ended up building a love story that became legendary in Trinity. She lived another 8 years after Nathan's death, still visiting the shop regularly though she no longer worked the forge herself. She was surrounded always by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the family she and Nathan had created spreading like branches of a strong tree. She told stories about the old days, about taking over the shop and meeting Nathan and learning that strength and love were not opposites, but complements. When Marlowe died at 81, she was buried beside Nathan in Trinity's cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Marlowe Dawson, noble blacksmith, wife, mother, beloved." Her funeral was as large as Nathan's had been, people coming to honor the woman who had defied expectations, built a legacy, and lived fully and bravely until the very end. The blacksmith shop continued, run by Thomas and eventually his children, the Dawson name remaining synonymous with quality metalwork in Colorado. The ranch thrived under Maggie's management, later passed to her nephew when she was ready to retire. And in both places, stories were told about Marlowe and Nathan, about how they had found each other and built something beautiful together, honoring both their individual strengths and their partnership. Their love story became part of Trinity's history, told and retold through generations. A reminder that the best partnerships are those where two strong people choose to be stronger together, where love means seeing all of someone and choosing them anyway, where happily ever after is not an ending but a daily choice to build something worth keeping. And in the forge that still burned in the shop bearing the Dawson name, in the horses that ran across the Double N Ranch, in the descendants who carried forward the values of hard work and respect and fierce love, Marlowe and Nathan's legacy lived on. Proof that some love stories transcend their own time and become something eternal, something that shapes the world long after the lovers themselves have passed into memory and legend.